Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Eric Blinderman from AOPA. Last week, the Environmental Protection Agency issued a determination that lead emissions from aircraft engines can cause or contribute to air pollution that may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health and welfare. We are speaking to you today as the EPA Initiative, Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions, to address this finding, provide some insight into potential impact on general aviation, and discuss what the EPA finding does not mean. As a reminder, EAGLE is a partnership comprising the general aviation industry and the FAA, encompassing the full range of partners in the mission of an unleaded GA future through a safe and smart transition. Today, you will hear from the co-chairs of EAGLE, Mark Baker of AOPA and Lirio Liu of the FAA. We also have other members of the EAGLE Executive Committee and subject matter experts on hand to provide insight. You will have the opportunity to ask questions through the function of this platform. I'm going to ask Andre Castro now to provide a quick detail on that. Andre?
Thanks, Eric. So today for our question period, we will be using the Slido app, which is located on the right-hand side of your deck. And you just need to open the Slido app. It's currently open to take questions. If you're ready, feel free to add those at any time.
Thanks, Andre. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mark Baker and Lirio Liu for some opening remarks. Mark?
Good morning, all. Today to address the EPA's endangerment finding and the transition to unleaded fuel. We've been part of this process for now close to 20 months. EAGLE started out, and this is an expected finding. And I just want to continue to reiterate: there's nothing new and unexpected in the finding and the intention for us to move away from low lead to no lead. The finding reiterates what we know and have been doing in dedication with great urgency. The joint industry FAA EAGLE initiative has voluntarily established a clear to eliminate lead aviation fuels no later than the end of 2030, and hopefully much sooner. We are making progress toward this goal with one STC field approved, going through some commercialization process, and 3 others in testing. It's very important to understand what this finding is not. It's essential that we have a safe and smart transition to ensure we do have 100 low lead must remain available at the nation's airports until a viable unleaded replacement is fielded, and this is about safety. Reminder that many aircraft that need the higher fuels to fly safely perform important missions of search and rescue, law enforcement, emergency, medevac, agricultural support, and flight training. We continue to educate those airports and communities where prematurely banning 100 low lead before replacement unleaded fuel is available that works for all is a matter of safety. The EPA endangerment finding does not limit or ban the availability or sale or use of 100 low lead in any way. We, the general aviation community, are working toward eliminating lead by 2030 or sooner. We have multiple potential replacement fuels under consideration. No one should read more into this than what it actually is. Our community faces challenges. It is important to remain factual about the findings and communicate the efforts underway to transition to an unleaded future. This industry is committed to the transition. The best and brightest minds are working on this every day. This is technically challenging to ensure safety and commercial viability. If this were easy, it had been done a long time ago. Lirio?
Thank you, Mark. Well, good afternoon, first of all. I guess it's morning at this point. I'm Lirio Liu, as was indicated, the head of the FAA's Aircraft Certification Service and also the co-chair for EAGLE. As Mark has mentioned, and clearly, we're here today to explain the impact of the EPA endangerment finding. And I'll do so from the FAA and the federal government point of view and explain what the actions mean and why it is being issued. So as many of you know, the EPA has been studying the emissions of lead from aircraft operating for many years with the assistance of the FAA. Now, this culminated in an October 18, 2023, when the EPA issued a final determination that lead emissions from piston engine aircraft cause or can contribute to air pollution, which may reasonably be anticipated to endanger the public health and welfare. So what does that mean? With this final determination, EPA will propose and promulgate a regulatory standard for lead emissions for aircraft engines. And likewise, EPA's official determination allows the FAA to prescribe standards for the composition or chemical or physical properties of aircraft fuel or fuel additives to control or eliminate the aircraft lead emissions. Now, let me clarify here, and to repeat what Mark has mentioned. EPA's action does not establish new control measures regarding aircraft-led emissions, nor does it ban or impose restrictions to the use, the sale, the distribution, dispensing, and general availability of leaded aviation gasoline. I think that's very important to remember. Rather, the EPA's final endangerment finding initiates the FAA and EPA to move forward with our authorities that we have to address leaded emissions from piston aircraft engines via our standard rulemaking process. This will be a multi-year effort. And I again will emphasize that, a multi-year effort, and is part of the process to remove the lead from the aviation gasoline system. Now, accordingly, the FAA is initiating rulemaking to remove lead gasoline from the nation's aviation system as part of our safe transition. Now, this rulemaking action that will start will go through our standard process, and the proposed rules will be subject to public comment as they always are. So there'll be an opportunity for comment. There'll be an opportunity to see the proposal. It will be through the regular normal process, and you'll be able to be following that through the websites that talk through the regulatory programs of the FAA. Now, let me also reassure the stakeholders that the FAA's rulemaking action will not be instantaneously removal of the leaded gasoline. Again, as I said, rulemaking takes quite a long period of time. And in developing those proposed rules, we acknowledge that we'll need to account for the scope of the transition, which includes a number of aspects that I think are very important to note. There's over 220,000 aircraft that will need the FAA approval or authorization to modify their limitations, which includes the decal placards, to be able to use an unleaded fuel. The fuel supply chain and airports will need to change and adopt for different fuels. There are trade-offs in performance, chemistry, cost, and compatibility among the various candidate fuels. And so we're working through EGLE to obtain additional information on those alternatives in order to inform the actions and the market decisions that will be needed to be taken in the facilitation of this transition. Again, I think we've said it, Mark said it, I said it a few times, there's a transition period right now to go on. Now, while the rulemaking is underway, we encourage the early adoption of unleaded fuels to gain operational experience and reduce the risk of reduce the risk in this transition. And in the interim, it is important that 100 low lead continue to be available for the safe operation across the breadth of the aviation community that requires this fuel until a replacement is available.
Thank you, Lirio. Can you give us an update, status of where we are with unleaded fuels in the process?
Sure, I can do that. I can give you the update. We have a number of candidate fuels, so I'll start with there. As you're aware, we've talked in a number of different venues. There are two pathways available to obtain an FAA safety approval for the use of a new fuel. There's the fleet authorization process and a traditional certification process, which is called a supplemental type certificate. The fleet authorization process was established by Congress, and it builds on a collaborative industry and government testing program, which was called the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative, PAFI. The STC, as I said, was a supplemental type certificate, is the traditional FAA process that we have for certification. In both cases, the FAA approves the use of the fuel. The fuel itself is self-regulated by industry based on fuel specifications and related standards. And right now we have two candidate fuels under each of these different pathways. So I'll talk at this point in the fuels that we're using that are going to be under the fleet authorization. Again, in both cases, the FAA approves the use of the fuel, and the fuel itself is self-regulated by industry. So under the fleet authorization process right now, Phillips 66/Afton Chemical team, that's a team there, and also Lionel Basil and VP Racing team are under the fleet authorization process. And then under the STC process, we have GAMI as one company and Swift Fuels as another. So where they stand. The PAFI program uses the phased approach of testing with gates to determine if the proposed fuel is viable, to take a more comprehensive testing after they've determined it's first viable. Both Afton Chemical Phillips 66, that's one team, and the Lionel Basil team have had to fine-tune their fuel mixtures based on some of the earlier testing. And now both of these refined fuels are in the PAFI screening testing phase, which means they've gone past the first being viable. Now they're going into more comprehensive testing. So right now, significant engine durability test milestones are expected to be completed by the end of 2023 for both of these fuels. If successful, the fuel will enter the full-scale fleet authorization testing, and that involves a broad range of engine performance and flight testing that's expected to be completed in about a 12 to 18-month period. The PAFI test data supports the ASTM International Consensus Standard process to establish a fuel specification, and following that, the issuance of an FAA fleet authorization. So those are the two fuels that are right now in the fleet authorization activity. Now, under the STC path, we've issued an approved model list for a supplemental type certificate in September of last year, 2022, to GAMI for the 100-octane unleaded fuel. So it's called G100UL. And that's certified for piston engine airplanes. The current design approval has a wide range of certified piston engines and airplanes available. This enables individual airplane owners to alter their aircraft to use this fuel. GAMI is also applied for approval for rotorcraft. So they're in that process right now. As part of this project, the FAA approved an independent specification for the G100LL after finding it provided an equivalent specification of property, performance, and quality control. So GAMI is responsible for and working with the key stakeholders to establish a pathway to the production and distribution. I think that's an important point to note. They are responsible for that activity. Under the STC process right now, we have Swift Fuels. They've applied for engine airplanes and rotorcraft to operate on a high octane unleaded fuel, which is termed 100R. Swift Fuels are also under the STC path, is working through an ASTM's consensus standard in addition to the STC to create an industry specification for their unleaded 100R fuel. So in addition to the high octane fuel that Swift currently holds an STC for UL 94, and that has been being provided since 2015. The UL 94 is available at 35 public airports right now and a number of other private fields. So the industry, again, as we've said, sorry for a second. In addition to, let me get back to this. So in addition to working under the PAFI program, we're also working to provide the fleet authorization for the UL 94. So this is again with Swift. Which would also authorize the use of UL 91 for that same aircraft. So Swift currently has approvals, and we're actually working through, so they did an STC, but they're actually going through now the fleet authorization program. So you can see that you've got these two pathways and you can do a blending of them and crossover. I think the main point is that we have resources available to try to get the fuel out there. Now, we estimate again that approximately 70% of the general aviation fleet will be able to use the UL 94 that we're working on right now with the fleet authorization. And so once that is authorized and available, that will be a resource. Aircraft owners and operators could still choose to procure the STC for the UL 94 or utilize the fleet authorization once we finalize that this calendar year. So if the fleet authorization accelerates approval or helps to expand the deployment effort for experimental and light sport aircraft, Swift Fuels has indicated they may merge their certification efforts for the 100R so that the PAFI and the fleet authorization using it both with the PAFI and the fleet authorization pathway. I apologize, I'm getting a little feedback, so I'm hearing myself talk. It's important to note also that under both the fleet authorization pathway and the STC pathway, owners and operators will need to take the specific actions in order to safely operate using the unleaded fuels. So we're happy to provide more specific information on the process at a later time, and there's more detailed information certainly under the Eagle website and on the white paper that's there under Fly Eagle. So I just want to summarize, that was a lot of information, but you can see that there is a lot of work going on to ensure that we have a safe replacement for unleaded fuel in the near future as we go through this transition.
Thank you, Lario. So let us now hear from Shanetta Griffin from the FAA's Office of Airports. And Shanetta will address the issue from the airport perspective. Shanetta?
Thank you, and really good morning, and really happy to be a part of the Eagle conversation today, and this where we are and where we're going, especially from airports. So I am Shanetta Griffin, the Associate Administrator for Airports with the FAA. And I just want to take a minute to specifically address the airport environment and the continuing work that the Office of Airports is doing to support this safe transition. The FAA has been working this issue for a long time. And these are, as we think about where we are now and all the progress that we have made and where we need to go, certainly the airports have been a part of that conversation. To facilitate a safe and orderly transition, we also want to highlight that research through the National Academy's Airport Cooperative Research Program is in progress to provide best practices for airports transitioning to unleaded aviation gasoline. This transition is complex, change initiatives that won't happen overnight. We see this as a gradual transition that will require potentially accommodating more than one fuel type for piston engine aircraft while maintaining 100 low lead. With this in mind, we collectively emphasize that airports, fixed-based operators, and airport users have a role in this transition and can implement constructive mitigation measures today to facilitate a safe transition. Some of those include working to offer additional unleaded fuel types, promoting airport and pilot awareness, increasing distance between run-up locations and people on/off airport by relocating run-up locations or distributing run-ups to multiple locations, and minimizing engine idle time and run-up time. For airports working to offer additional unleaded fuel types, a key enabling step may include installing additional fuel infrastructure like an additional tank. Alternately, airports may be able to utilize a spare tank. We do not want to take into fact that there's a lack of key enabling infrastructure to resist the safe adoption of unleaded fuels. We encourage airports to include their transition to unleaded fuels in airport planning initiatives. For airports in the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, there are potential resources that may be available to support transition enabling infrastructure and planning efforts. Under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill, or the Airport Infrastructure Grant Program, allocated funds can be used on sponsor-owned, revenue-producing aeronautical support facilities such as fuel farm. We have a lot of information on our website under our bill FAQs for additional information there. The FAA is currently authorized to provide limited entitlement funding through the Airport Improvement Program, or AIP, for aircraft fueling systems, fuel farms, or an additional tank at non-primary general aviation airport locations. Also, on our website, you can see our Airport Improvement Program Handbook for additional information for that funding as well. Finally, we want to continue to emphasize to our airports, as Luriel has mentioned, this endangerment finding is the start of a process. Policies, regulation standards, adequate supply, and ample infrastructure will be essential. We will continue to work with our airports and across the FAA, EPA, and the industry to ensure all elements needed for a gradual, safe transition are in place. I want to again repeat, and I know you all have heard this now twice, but I want to repeat what both Luriel and Mark stated. EPA's action does not establish new control measures regarding aircraft lead emissions, nor does it ban or impose restrictions on the use, sale, distribution, dispensing, and general availability of leaded aviation gas. So thank you, and I'll turn that back over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Shanetta. I'd like to now call on Kurt Castagna, who is President and CEO of the National Air Transportation Association. And Kurt, can you provide us the business perspective from general aviation service companies?
It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, everyone. Businesses and communities at our nation's airports, more than 5,000 public use GA airports, stand to bear much of the brunt from this endangerment finding in terms of the questions and calls for next steps. It's important that we all get the perspective from those organizations that represent the interest of the nation's airports and the businesses that serve pilots and the communities in those areas. NATA, as aviation business advocates and as an active participant in the unleaded aviation fuel stakeholder group here, is uniquely qualified to discuss those issues surrounding a rational transition to unleaded aviation fuel, to provide best practices for deploying unleaded avgas, and to act as a conduit for collaboration between airport stakeholders and community leaders. NATA represents over 3,700 member locations, and it advocates on behalf of a broad array of aeronautical service providers requisite for a vibrant general aviation sector, including fuel producers, refiners, fuel distributors, fixed-based operators, and roughly 220 general aviation airports. NATA and other national aviation associations are actively working together with congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers to ensure the final FAA reauthorization bill will support a safe transition to unleaded alternatives for 100 low lead today as swiftly and as efficiently as possible. This will require language in reauthorization that, one, supports the development, testing, approval, and vetting of candidate fuels. Two, it protects the safe access to 100 low lead during that process. And three, supports airports to transition to an unleaded alternative as quickly and as safely as possible. Continued support is needed to push all four candidate fuels through the entire process to ensure a commercially viable replacement for 100 low lead is available as quickly as possible. Airports and FBOs cannot transition to a new unleaded fuel without an established refiner and distribution supply chain, where those entities have established standards themselves that govern all transportation fuels in America. Refiners and distributors have years of experience with the safe handling and delivering of aviation gasoline and the specific requirements for standards and quality control. The refiners and distributor standards should now align with the introduction of any new unleaded fuel to the marketplace. And a candidate fuel must not pose environmental risk equal to or greater than those to the leaded fuel it replaces. Local airports and communities transitioning to a fuel prematurely could ultimately delay commercialization of a viable replacement fuel by diverting resources to a fuel before it is proven safe, compatible with the supply chain, and environmentally sound. As we collectively move toward a scalable solution, NATA and its members are demonstrating leadership in keeping safety first focus on infrastructure support, as well as on the development of resources and training for airports, FBOs, and other refueling operators. For example, NATA has recently released the Unleaded Avgas Conversion Considerations for Aviation Fuel Providers white paper to educate fuel service providers on best practices for the safe and effective deployment of unleaded avgas, and we will continue to assist the industry through every phase of this process. NATA, FBOs, fuel suppliers and producers, maintenance, repair, overhaul facilities, and other aviation industry stakeholders are dedicated to working with the FAA and the EPA to secure the necessary regulatory approvals for a fleet authorization, lead-free alternative avgas to replace 100 low lead that is compatible with the existing infrastructure while maintaining 100 low lead availability across the country during the transition. We're pleased to be part of this process and thank the group here and their collaborative support. I'll turn it back over to Mark and Larry.
Thank you, Kurt. So Lirio and Mark, can you give us a sense of next steps in this safe and smart transition?
Certainly, I think I'll start. First off, I think we've heard it multiple times here, but the EPA and the FAA have already begun to work to consider the regulatory options to address the lead emissions from aircraft engines, and we'll announce timelines as soon as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a multi-year effort. That's what rulemaking is. And it is a part of our overall process to remove lead from the aviation gasoline. I think it's important to note that EPA and the FAA, we've had a very collaborative working arrangement, and we'll continue to work together in partnership, and we'll engage all interested stakeholders and the general public and as the two agencies develop their separate regulatory actions. And while they're separate actions, they're going to be very well coordinated. And again, going through the traditional process we have for regulatory promulgation, so the rulemaking process. Mark?
Thanks, Larry. So I don't want to be too redundant here. I think the important key parts are for going forward. We want to ensure the supply of 100 low lead until commercially available alternatives are safely in place. Yet we're looking forward to demonstrations of fuels, of STCs and PAFI fuels as they move down the line as quickly as possible to get them and build confidence in the general aviation public user market. So the industry and government are going to work on the same page. Lead needs to be removed. But we just need to do it safely and smart. Thanks.
Mark and Lario. I'm going to call on Andre now to see if we have questions, and perhaps Andre, you can give a primer again on if anybody has a question on how to pose it.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So we do have we're using Slido to take our questions today. It's over there in the right-hand corner of your platform. It says Slido Q&A. You can just enter that in through there, and we're happy to take your questions. I do have kind of our first question has come through, and the question is, do you anticipate a single fuel to rise to the top and to be a single replacement for 100 LL? Supply chain issues in Alaska will be limited to a single fuel and not multiple options.
I'll just speak first off to the approval. We're going and pursuing multiple options because I think that is what has been presented to us. I think it will be industry demand in the industry market that will determine the number of fuels that will be available in the end.
I support Lario's view on that. That the market's going to dictate whether it's price, availability, logistics, and support for the fuels. But we're just interested in getting a number of them across the finish line to get out there and start using these fuels quickly as possible.
Gary, you have a question? All right.
Are we good on questions now, Andre?
I don't have any else that have come through. I do see a hand, but I'm unable to call on Gary there. But if anybody else, please feel free to go through the breakout session on Slido.
So meanwhile, why don't we turn to Mark and Lario for some closing words?
So I'll start, Lario, and you can finish. But as part of our plan from day one as a rotating leadership, I'm pleased to announce that my colleague Kurt Castanga, President and CEO of the National Air Transportation Association, will become the industry co-chair of EAGLE effectively immediately. It's been my honor to serve as a co-chair for the last year and a half or more. But I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, and it's in good hands. One of the things that we both work very closely on is these 5,000 public airports, and we both know we've got some hot spots that we're going to work together on to make sure we can communicate our intention to move away from low lead to no lead to save our current ecosystem of all support of all low lead fuel. So Kurt, go for it.
Thank you, Mark. As we evolve into what we hope to be the distribution area and getting the fuel to airports and FBOs, I think we're pleased to be participant as co-chair in this organization. And it's been humbling to work with Mark and our other industry partners in this role to move to an unleaded alternatives for the industry. And we're most grateful to Mark for his work as co-chair, his leadership on behalf of his members and the industry overall to help spread awareness and education of EAGLE. So really looking forward to this, and thank you for the trust.
Well, let me just first echo too. It has been really a privilege and an honor working with Mark. He is really an aviation professional in every way. And again, as I came into this position as the co-chair, Mark and the team, the whole committee, to be truthful, have really taken it very seriously and set up a really well-structured organization to really look at all the aspects needed to be able to do this transition. I mean, this again, as Mark said it in the beginning, if it was easy, it would be done. And we know we have some challenges ahead of us, but we are really committed to ensuring that we keep the stakeholders involved and engaged and apprised of the progress that we're making. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this. But Mark, I mean, we're going to be missed. You'll still be engaged, but really appreciated the guidance and the help that you provided me as I came into this role. And then Kurt, I'm really looking forward to our continued engagement. Again, I'll just say the EAGLE committee here, this activity is really to try to put a concerted effort in all aspects that are important to be able to make this transition work smoothly and be successful. I think I'll just close out by saying that we are also planning to have another stakeholders meeting in the first quarter of 2024. And I would suggest that anyone here that's interested, we've been trying to keep the communication chains open. And I think Gary now is waving, so he might want to come back in. But we do have the flyeagle.org website that's available that has a number of resources available. So I guess I'll go back to Andre to see if you wanted to moderate again.
Sure. I've got a couple of additional questions that have come through. And additionally, if we didn't get to your question, we will get back to you personally. The next question I have is there are people that will use the EPA to report or to fast forward the closing of airports or to stop the sale of 100 low lead. What is the FAA planning to do to keep these airports open and to keep 100 low lead flowing?
Thank you for that question. So we're certainly working with our airports to try and get out the word that this is not, the EPA Endangerment Finder does not allow an airport to close. It does not allow an airport to stop completely the ban of leaded fuel. There are grant assurances, especially for those airports that are under our grant program and our obligated airports, that they do need to follow in regards to that. And if that is the case, if we have to come in and do investigation, that's certainly what we would do. But we certainly want to continue to emphasize that this does not give openness to close an airport, nor does it give openness to ban leaded fuel until we have a viable option, we have enough supply, we have the proper infrastructure. So again, want to emphasize that it's regarding safe, gradual transition to unleaded fuel.
Thank you. Next question I had is, EGLE's white paper says that the transition is committed to happening no later than the end of 2030. Is that a mandated requirement from the EPA's finding, or is that just kind of an unofficial goal?
That's an unofficial goal from a regulatory perspective. As I think Lirio pointed out, they're going to be working with both agencies with a timeline and sufficient safety factors built into that. But it is certainly the industry's commitment to move as fast as possible and with the intention of no later than 2030.
And my final question for today that we'll wrap up is, what are the implications of the EPA endangerment finding to general aviation in real time?
I think I would probably turn to some of the users of the system as opposed to just the approval part of it. But I mean, I think what we see is just it's the current implications of the endangerment finding would be somewhat overreacting, taking actions that are appropriate at this moment. And that's why we wanted to have this communication. The EPA finding only starts the process. It is made a determination that it has the possibility to be a danger that needs to be addressed. And that is now where we go through the rulemaking process, which we indicated is a lengthy process, but it's also a deliberate process so that we get comments and develop the right regulatory strategy. So I think that if you ask the question I'd ask others here as well, what they see as the biggest risk is, I think some rash action taken that might actually disrupt the current safe operation that we have. And I think what we need to have is the current fuels available so that those aircraft operators, when they arrive at an airport, will have the fuel that they need so that they can continue their operations.
Andre, I would just support what Lirio said, is I think the endangerment finding will activate concerns to speed up the ban in local communities in advance of this national effort. And I think it's really important that the message that's been delivered here through Lirio and Shanetta and the team is that it really needs to be communicated very aggressively in some areas of the country to make that point made, so that airport sponsors understand their grant obligations and what the evolutionary process is. And airport managers are really looking for that support. Airport directors are looking for that support. Airport sponsors and elected leaders sometimes put pressure on airport managers. And so those airport leadership teams are looking for this group to provide them the ammunition to help defend this case. So I think what we did here was great. I just think we have to really reinforce the message.
Thank you. And I just want to echo, of course, what everyone has said in regards to that. And I really would encourage any of our airports, general aviation, commercial, wherever these aircraft are, to work with your ADOs, work with your regions. That's what we're here for in the Office of Airports, is to be that support, to provide guidance, to provide direction. So I would just say, if there's ever a question or a concern, certainly go to your ADO, go to your region. If you need to come to headquarters where I am, that's fine too. But we want to make sure that we're here as a support and a partner in this safe transition. So I would offer that too as a response to how we can make sure that our general aviation community is well taken care of in regards to this transition.
Well, that's all I have. Eric, if you want to close this
Right.
out.
Thank you, Andre. So thanks everybody again for attending today's session. As stated, and as Lario and Mark talked about, we're going to maintain our transparency with stakeholders during this safe and smart transition. We invite you to visit flyeagle.org for information related to Eagle and the transition. And with that, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you.